Hey, welcome back to the VisualNeo for Windows tutorial. We're going to continue on with variables and variable arrays, and also global variables, which we'll touch on, and some predefined characters. So getting started, I did touch on this in the last video, but we're just going to recap real quickly. I have a couple of objects here. I have a button, I have a text input, and just a text. So what I'm going to do is double click the button here, and under the Actions tab, I'm going to insert an action. Under Variables here, I'm going to set the var. The variable I want to manipulate is simple var. I could type it in, but I also wanted to show you that VisualNeo keeps track of all the variables you use. As you get multiple pages, you may use a variable on this page, and you may be working on this page here. And, instead of going back to see what it was named, it keeps track of all of them. And you can see here my author defined variables. You can see simple var is right there. So we'll insert it. That's the variable we want to manipulate. And the value we're going to store in is hello. Okay, just going over this real quick because we kind of already covered it. And when I run, there we go. And the text input box is also set to manipulate the simple variable the simple var variable. So if I type that in, of course, it affects that variable. We did cover that a little bit on the previous video. If you want to watch that one, go ahead and watch that one. You'll see a little more info on that one. This video, I'm probably going to focus mostly on arrays because arrays can be a little bit confusing for newcomers to programming. And this is the 101 series, so it's going to be pretty explanatory. If you already know about all this, maybe skip ahead a minute or two because I'll be spending that on arrays. Okay, so to get started, I have a button object here. And when I double click it, it takes me into the properties window where I can get to the actions. And you can see what I've done here, just to save time on typing, is I've used the set var command, which we used in the simple variable action. This time you'll notice the variable has a number at the end of it. So what that's going to do is the variable is not actually myvar1. The variable is myvar. And the section of the array that it's going to manipulate is the first section, section 1, section 2, section 3, so on. In the first socket, I'm going to put this is my first variable, and then number 2, I put this. So when we do that, we have a variable named myvar with multiple pieces in it, 1, 2, and 3. Now, what are you going to do with that? So you can examine and manipulate an array. I'm going to start this with, I'm going to get the array info, okay? And the name of the variable array to examine, we know, is myvar, because that's what we set up here, myvar. And we oftentimes in things like loops and these sort of situations, I often used to use XYZ as my variable names to gather information. So I'm going to store the lower array of bounds in X, the upper array bounds in Y, and the total number of items in the array I'm going to store in the variable Z. Okay, so what this does is it gets the information about this variable, stores the information in variables so that I can examine them. Now, for instance, okay, let's stop there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add over here, there's a list box. I'm going to add a list box, and I'm not going to put anything in it just yet. I just want the list box to be there. So let me change this to white just to make it look a little nicer. Okay, so what I'm going to do is when I click this button, I've gotten the array info. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to do a loop. Okay, so in the button, the next line of code I want to insert is under control. Control has quite a bit of stuff. We're going to go over, actions a little more in another video. This one we're kind of concentrating on variables. But this time I'm going to loop. Now I'm going to start the loop position on 1. Now I don't necessarily know how, sometimes, when I'm gathering information, how many pieces are going to be in the variable. All I know is that I've gotten that information, how many pieces, using this line of code, and it put that information in Z. So I'm going to use Z as my last position in the loop. And where I am in the loop, I'll just put POS for position, and that is going to pop up this little block. Okay, so anything I put in here, no matter how much, it's going to execute those lines of code and then return to and do it again until it's run through the number of times I told it to. In this case, we are going to we'll go to objects, and this objects is quite large. Don't let it intimidate you. We're going to go to list box and combo box, and we're going to add item. Okay, the object name, you can click here. We added the object, and if you click it, there it is, list box 2. We want to add something to list box 2, and where do we want to add it? 0 is the end of the list, which is, I almost always use this, but there are times where you have a specific location in the list you want to add something. And the text that we want to add to the list box is my var and the position of the loop, and then we'll close that out. So let's take a look at the code. What that's going to do is going to add an item to list box 2. 0 means it's going to add to the end of the list. And my var and the position of the loop. And we know that the first time through the loop, the position variable is going to equal 1 because it's the first time through the loop. So this is going to call on my var 1. The second time through the loop, obviously, position is going to equal 2. That means it's going to add another item to the list box. This time it'll be my var 2, and so on. So just for to make things a little more graphical, otherwise it'll be instant, I'm just going to put a delay in here. Now if I go down to control, down near the bottom here, under miscellaneous, you can see delay. What that does is it just pauses. It pauses the execution for a set amount of milliseconds. We'll just do it for about 1 second. So there'll be a pause of 1 second before it returns and starts the loop again. So with this code set up the way it is, let's give it a try. And we know that if I click this button, it's going to create the variable array, and then it's going to examine it and give us information about that, and then it's going to run the loop. And in the loop, each time through, it's going to add a line to the list box. So let's click it and give it a try. Nope, didn't work. Now, okay, let's take a look at why that happened. Oftentimes, sometimes it's best to use, like in this situation, to call on my var, and always you'll see under author defined the array as well. But you can see here what I did was I put in mayvar. So let's correct that. myvar, there we go. That's more like it. Sometimes these spelling errors can cause catastrophic results. So now let's again we'll click it and we'll watch it in action. There we go. Okay, so we saw what happened. The loop ran through 3 times, and I don't know if you saw that, but if we run it again, you'll see the position of the loop as it goes through, and it's adding each one of those pieces of the array at one time. If I click it again, it won't clear this because I didn't tell it to. It'll continue on. So click it again, you get to positions 1, 2, and 3. There we go. So I hope that makes sense. Just to recap, we create a variable, we make it an array by adding 1 at the end, 2, and 3. It's still the variable myvar. Here we can get information about myvar. We can get the lower bounds, the upper bounds, and the total number in the list. We store that information that it figured out, that it went and looked at and got, in variables. And here we're using the total number in this loop, 1 through z, which in this case happens to be 3. And yeah, it goes through, adds a line one at a time to the list box. So I hope that was helpful in explaining variable arrays. Also, you know, when you get when you start getting into this stuff, if I haven't covered something, the VisualNeo has a fantastic help. I mean, really great help file. See, you can get into variable arrays here, and this will give an excellent explanation. It'll give you some examples again, and they use a loop as an example. Really, it's worth reading through this stuff. Really simple explanations, but very poignant. Like they're really good at not being too wordy, like I am. Anyway, so we're going to move on. That is variable arrays. We're going to move to global variables. So when you set a variable, like I showed you before, when you insert a variable, there's author defined, but there's also global. Now, some of these store information that you can't manipulate, and some you can. Like the CD-ROM drive. Okay, you can get the drive letter for your CD-ROM drive, which nowadays there are no. I mean, I don't think they're even making computers with CDs anymore. But you know, those sorts of things like drive letters, date long, date short. That's to get the date, not set the date. What else? Those sorts of things, they can't be manipulated. But like your current drive, you can't put information in that. That's to get the information of what the current drive is. There are some that you can manipulate, like mail port, mail progress, mail server. This is if you want to use the send mail action, but you don't want to have the user put in their mail server, mail user ID. You can set these variables beforehand, and global variables are incredibly useful. Like my documents, you can get the path to the user's my documents. That's not always the same. Sometimes people set it up differently. You can get the name of the network drive. What are some other handy ones? Pub directory. Now this one's often used because if you're going to save a file and you want to save it wherever they installed your application, they may change the location. They may install it to C program files, something totally different. You don't know where they installed it to, but you need to know where your program sits. Pub directory tells you where your program sits in the hierarchy of their file system. Very useful. Pub drive is also. Now these are also, you know, useful in scaling your interface, but I'll get into that a little more. Again, if you want more detailed information about each and every one, they have a fantastic help file. I couldn't say more about their help file. It's just great. And sometimes you need special characters inside a variable or inside anything. So they have something called predefined characters. If you need to use a quotation, but you can't use a quotation in your code because that'll confuse your line of code. For instance, we want to set a variable with a quotation in it. We'll just name it test. And we want to store this is a quotation mark. And then we can't put that in there because if we do, you'll see that, well, look at that. It put it in there for you. So that's fantastic. Actually, I didn't know they had added that. That's great. If you were to have done it this way, that's going to confuse the code because this is going to tell it that's the end of this section of code. So if you put that in there, it's going to confuse it because it's not going to know what to do with this one. So that's great that they do that. When you put this in, it puts in the special character. And there's many special characters. So you have your square brackets, um, carriage return is used pretty often, tab is used pretty often, and you can put those in there using special characters. So I hope that was helpful, give you a little bit of insight on how variables are used in Visual Neo. Um, I hope that was, yeah, I hope that was good for you guys. I'll start my next one soon, and we'll move on to the fun stuff, which is your objects and tools and how to manipulate and use those. So have a great one. We'll see you next time.